Bitcoin is really an amazing technology, and it meets all of the definitions that Peter elucidated yesterday about in terms of a disruptive technology, and it's going to be very fun to talk about it today. So there's three basic ideas three lenses through which you can talk about Bitcoin. One is, is it a good money? Does it satisfy the properties of good money? And I'll touch on that a little bit, and just to kind of give you the contours of the debate, talk a little bit about whether it is a good and to what extent a good type of money. Second is the kind of Bitcoin ecosystem and all the amazing things that you can do with the blockchain that has nothing to do with currency. And that we'll talk a lot about in the panel that I'm going to moderate next. And third is just, how does Bitcoin work, actually? What is the technology, and why are geeks so excited about this? Why is Satoshi Nakamoto really such a genius? And why does Bitcoin deserve to be up on stage with all of the other kinds of technologies that we're talking about today? And that's what I'm going to try to dig into a little bit and kind of get our hands dirty a little bit in terms of how Bitcoin actually works, how the technology actually works. So Satoshi Nakamoto, and it is no coincidence that during the financial crisis is when he published this paper, came to and he was not the first one to do this, the realization that our financial system as it is now, with a central counterparty-based, a central bank-based, needing of a central counterparty-based financial system, requires an enormous amount of trust. And it's not just the trust that brought the lack of, the violation of that trust that brought us to the financial crisis, the kind of credit bubbles and credit creation, but it was also the violation that he considered of trust of central banks taking us out of the financial crisis, printing money, quantitative easing, inflating away currencies. And the observations about the problems with a central counterparty for making payments in the financial systems as we know it are that, access is regulated. So you have to have a bank account to get a bank. You have to have a driver's license to get a bank account. You have to trust your counterparty. You have to believe that Chase Bank is not going to, go bankrupt with your money. Your account can be frozen. It can be taxed. It can be confiscated. Your counterparties could refuse to make your payment. Your payment could be reversed. Money transfer takes time, and you are not keeping the float on that. Money transfer is costly, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later. Your transaction reveals a lot of information about you, so 70 million customers at Target were impacted. If they had all used Bitcoin, Target would have lost money, but nobody would have known anything about any of that customer information. And so all of these things have to do with the fact that you have to use a credit card company, or you have to use a bank to make your financial transactions. And moreover, a central bank system also requires a lot of trust. You have to believe that your central bank is not going to inflate away your currency. Bitcoin is a system that does not require trust. That's the fundamental kind of one-liner about it. It is a completely disintermediated system, so there's no central counterparty in charge. And the public ledger, it's just a ledger. It's a ledger of transactions going back to the beginning of sort of Bitcoin time. That ledger can be downloaded on anybody's computer. So you can have a copy of Bitcoin, anybody. It's completely transparent. And all of the software and the rules are open source. So it's a very much kind of a Linux-type environment. And it's also a consensual system. So in order to make changes to the source code, consensus has to be arrived at in order to do that. And because of that, it has some really great monetary properties that make it disruptive as a currency. But again, this talk and what I want you to take out of it is going to be much more than just about the monetary properties. But they are in themselves significant. So transactions costs are very low. Barriers to entry are extremely low. All you need is a cell phone or a Wi-Fi connection, and you can be up and running with Bitcoin. It's pseudonymous, so it is not anonymous, which is an important point. So it is, transactions can be, the history of a transaction can be traced back through the public addresses of that transaction. But that public address is not associated with a particular person like you or I. Transactions are irreversible after about an hour. So it takes about 10 minutes to add a new page to the ledger. We call it adding a new block to the blockchain. After about 6 of these are appended, then no transactions can be reversed. And so it gives you that heightened sense of security that you are paid and you will always be paid. And micropayments are possible. So 1 Bitcoin is divisible to 8 decimal places. As you can imagine, the lowest denomination of a Bitcoin is, of course, called a Satoshi. Actually, nobody knows who Satoshi Nakamoto is. And as an aside, you may be aware of the Newsweek article. They tried to break the story about Dorian Satoshi Nakamoto that they discovered in LA. Turns out he's really not the guy. And so there is a kind of an inside joke in the Bitcoin world that a not yet confirmed Bitcoin transaction is called a Dorian. So little Bitcoin humor, geek humor for you there. And there are about 2.1 quadrillion Satoshi, and there's only about a quadrillion pennies in the world. So that just is to explain that there's a kind of enough money out there for Bitcoin. And also, it is a deflationary currency. And there's two things that are important about that. One is that the supply dynamics of Bitcoin are known ex ante. So when I worked at an investment bank, our research department spent a lot of time trying to just figure out what the Fed was going to do on any given monetary policy committee meeting. Bitcoin, you know exactly how that, and I think I've got a slide, yeah, how that supply dynamics are going to work from here until about 2140 when the last Bitcoins will be issued. Second, it is deflationary for a couple of different reasons. You get paid to mine Bitcoins, and you get paid less and less over time. So you're paid, it halves every 4 years. And then the third reason it's deflationary is that if you lose your Bitcoins, they are gone from the system. There is no replacement. So don't lose your private key if you use Bitcoins. OK, so there's a couple of reasons, though, that people bring up why Bitcoin might not be a perfect currency. One is that it's illiquid. JP Morgan makes the observation that the daily turnover of Bitcoin is now about equivalent to the Mauritius Stock Exchange, so that's not a lot. But obviously, if network effects continue to kick in, then that problem will get worse. It's actually quite volatile. It's about 20 times more volatile than dollar yen. And there have been on 3 or 4 occasions drops of over 35%. And you need a pretty iron stomach to take a 35% daily volatility. No cash yield. And then, of course, it's not a fiat currency, so taxes aren't being forced to be paid in it. So there's no full faith and credit backing it up. As I mentioned, when it's gone, it's gone. And as the regulatory environment gets a bit more burdensome, and we'll talk about that on the panel, then transaction costs will increase. And then it's brought up often that deflationary currencies put off spending. People save because they think prices will be lower next time and later in the future, and so it kind of it postpones economic activity, and that could be inherently recessionary. So those are the kinds of the arguments made against. But I just want to read you a couple of numbers in terms of how Bitcoin could be disruptive just as a currency. And so Peter talked about this yesterday: disintermediation and demonetization. And these are some big numbers. Retail transaction fees, 2.5%, $260 billion last year. E-commerce transaction fees, 2.9%, $18 billion last year. Remittances, 8.9%, Western Union, $48 billion last year. And bank transaction fees, $524 billion last year. So there's a lot of disintermediation and demonetization that could come about through the use of Bitcoin. But none of this is what makes Bitcoin worthy of being up on this stage. And when you're, say, at a cocktail party, and you want to impress a member of the opposite sex, what you really want to say is, hey, Bitcoin is an unbelievable technology. It's an unbelievable thing, and I'm really excited about it because Bitcoin is a distributed database where the order of transactions is agreed upon by everybody. I am telling you, this is a winner for you. Seriously, that is why Satoshi Nakamoto is a genius. That is why I'm standing up here, and that is why people like Mark Andreessen are so excited about this technology. So what does that mean? That means that when I have a Chase bank account, and I pay Jane $10, and I have $10 in my account, and then I tried to pay Joe $10, Chase Bank runs that accounting for me and says, no, you don't have any money left in your account. You can't pay Joe. My check to Joe will bounce. How does that happen without a central counterparty, without Chase Bank or your credit card saying, no, you don't have any money left? If it's a completely distributed system, who decides that? Who knows? And so nothing that I've talked about to date is new at all. Cryptocurrencies have been around for a long time. Completely secure payments have been around since the 90s. But this was the problem that nobody could solve. And computer geeks call it the Byzantine generals problem. It's also called the timestamp problem in computer science. How do you, in a disintermediated system, have complete agreement on the state of affairs of the world? What came first? My payment to Jane came first. She gets paid. We all agree that payment to Joe is not legitimate because I didn't have any money left. How do you do that without Chase Bank there saying, running my account numbers and deciding how much I have in my account? That's what was solved. And so that's what we're going to talk about for the rest of this lecture, how actually that works. So strap in, OK? What happens? OK, so Alice sends Bitcoins to her friend Bob. She has a private key, which kind of unlocks her public address. She knows Bob's public address. Again, it's not associated with Bob, so you can't actually get back to him as a person. But and then the Bitcoins show up in Bob's public address. All of the other nodes, computers, there are about 20,000 of them in the system, verify that that transaction is OK. And then it is added to the ledger. A bunch of these things are done on 10-minute intervals. They're gathered together in blocks of 10-minute intervals. And they're appended to the blockchain every 10 minutes. So this is a very nice picture of that comes from a great article, actually, that's called By Reading This Article, You're Mining Bitcoin. So I recommend it to you if you want to see a bit more. So Alice's transfer to Bob goes at the end of the public ledger. And by the way, as an aside, Alice, in cryptography, Alice always transfers to Bob. It's always Alice, and it's always Bob. Don't go embarrassing yourself by coming up with an example where Mike gives money to Joe, because that just does not work. Then each blockchain is all of the transactions are appended to the next block, and so this is block in progress. And that ledger, again, is available. Everybody can see that. It's available to everybody. OK, so what are the three problems that Bitcoin needed to solve? So the first one is, how do you keep the ledger as a whole secure from system failure or from hacking? And that is solved by having a distributed model. So there's no kind of point of vulnerability that a central counterparty system would have. Second, you have to make sure that each transaction is secure. And that's done by this public-private key technology. And again, there's nothing new about that. Third, though, is how do you protect the integrity of the ledger? And that means solving the double payments problem. And that's what we're going to talk about for the rest of this talk. OK, so we need to talk a little bit about cryptographic hash functions, which I know you woke up this morning thinking, boy, I really hope we are going to be talking about cryptographic hash functions. There are a couple of really interesting things to know about cryptographic hash functions. One is that you take any amount of information, and it will come, it's translated into a fixed output. So Bitcoin uses SHA-256, so the output is always 256 bits. You can put the Holy Bible in it. You can put the World Book Encyclopedia. It will always come out by running this cryptographic hash function into an output of 256 bits. That's the first very important thing about it. The second is that you cannot go from your hash function back to understanding what went into it. So anybody that looks at the Bible and runs the same cryptographic hash function will get the same hash function at the end. So all of the transactions are easily verifiable. That is how all of the computer nodes verify the transactions. But knowing the hash function, you can't get back and you can't understand what all those transactions were. I mean, the reverse lookup table would be so astronomical that it's impossible. And third, a tiny change in the input makes a very large change in the cryptographic hash function, and that turns out to be critical. So we have an example here. The quick brown fox jumps over the lazy dog. The quick brown fox jumps over the lazy dog, period. And look how different the two hash functions are. They're not anything like each other. And so that turns out to be a very important property of this for solving this double payments problem. OK, so what you do to add transactions to the ledger is the following. You take all of the transactions, you put them through this cryptographic hash function. You then, so 10 minutes worth of transactions are out there. All of the nodes gather them up, they take all the transactions, they take the timestamp, they add a timestamp, they add a pay me if I win and I do the work first line, and they take the line, the hash function of the blockchain to reference the blockchain, and they put that in a hash function, and whoever gets there first wins. Okay, and they get the right to add those transactions to the block, and they get paid in Bitcoin to do that. Does this solve the problem? Do you think that solves the problem? No, right. That does not solve the problem. Because it's too easy still. What if Alice paid Bob, and then Alice immediately turned around and paid Staci, an outcome that I would support? Or what if an evil node, an evil computer, went back and tried to mess with the ledger sort of 6 blocks ago? Nothing about that solves that problem, because so if Alice pays Bob and then Alice pays Staci, then there's 2 versions of the ledger. There's 2 kind of branches to the tree. Which one is legitimate? We haven't solved that problem yet. And who knows? All of these, and again, this is where the genius is. All of these computers, without anybody telling them, have to come to a consensus of which branch of that ledger is the legitimate one. The answer to that is the branch of the ledger which has in it the most work, okay? And so how do we define the most work? You have to create a hard problem for the nodes to do. And by hard problem, I mean computational difficulty, not brain use. So in addition to gathering all that information and coming up with a hash function, what you do to make the problem hard is you say, that hash function has to have certain properties. It has to have a certain number of zeros to start. It has to be a small enough number. So basically, it's like saying, I'm thinking of a number between 1 and 100. I'm thinking of 67. And you have to guess 67. So what I make you do, and this is really essentially all that these Bitcoin miners are doing, is they say 30. I go, nope. 40, nope. 99, nope. And they keep guessing and guessing and guessing until they get to the number that I'm thinking of, 67. That's what's going on with this hash function. So you hash all this stuff together, you get a hash function, and the system says, not the hash function I want. I want a hash function that starts with a certain number of zeros. So how do you do that? Well, because cryptographic hash functions look so differently when you just add something small, like a period at the end of a sentence, you keep adding things. So you have all of the transactions, you've got the timestamp, you've got the pay me line, you've got the rest of the ledger, and then you add something else, and you keep re-adding this thing, which is called a nonce. A nonce, which is called numerator, number enumerated once. You keep adding this, and there are 32, the number is between 0 and I think 32 billion. You keep adding these numbers, you keep adding them, and then finally you get to a hash function that you like. And so everybody's happy. Now, if you get to that hash function, you win, and you win Bitcoins. And so what's genius about this system is that this is how Bitcoins are rewarded. So what Satoshi Nakamoto came up with is a system where incentives are aligned such that if you do the work, you get paid in Bitcoins, and all of the computers that are doing the work are protecting the integrity of the ledger. And so it's a very fair system. And this is how the money supply is managed. And so it's organized so that it should take 10 minutes to append the new block of transactions. If every 2 weeks they check this, and if it has taken less than 10 minutes, well, then they make that proof of work problem a little harder. And if it takes more than 10 minutes, they make the proof of work problem a little bit easier. So it's basically orchestrated so that it takes about 10 minutes to do this. So why does this solve the problem? And it's what Peter talked about yesterday when he was talking about dinosaurs. And he said, look, standing still is not a good strategy. Standing still is not doing nothing. Standing still is actually falling behind, because if you stand still for too long, you will never catch up. And I smiled to myself because this is basically the principle behind Bitcoin. They make this proof of work problem so hard that, they make the proof of work problem so hard that if you go back as an evil node, you are and you try to change a transaction, you can never keep up with the blockchain. You'll never get there again. So it will always be out in front of you. That's the less interesting way that it's protected. The more interesting way that it's protected is that incentives are completely aligned. So if you did, in fact, have enough computer power to have 51% of the computer power, your incentives would not be to go back and change the blockchain and try to cheat. Your incentives would be, in fact, to play by the rules and earn Bitcoin. So you're incented to play by the rules and to earn Bitcoin in kind of the legitimate way of doing so. And that's how it works. And when you think about this system as a system that solves a timestamp problem that exists where everybody agrees on the state of affairs without the use of trust, okay? Without Chase Bank saying, yeah, Jane got paid first, Stacy doesn't get paid, you can imagine a whole bunch of other domains where that sort of system can be disruptive. So we'll talk about some of the more interesting ones in the panel, but just to say a couple of the banal ones, the telephone company allocates phone numbers. You don't need a telephone company to allocate phone numbers if you can solve that timestamp problem. Icon allocates web addresses. You don't need Icon to allocate web addresses to say who came first if you can have a system where everybody agrees who came first. So those are the sorts of things that we're going to talk about in much more detail on the panel.